Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and Ken is taking a well-earned break. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a really important subject. So if you're a student or you're thinking of taking a counselling course or you know somebody who's thinking of taking a counselling course, stick around because this is really, really important information that we're going to be listening to in the next few minutes through this interview. And it's generated by lots of comments in our Facebook page. And if you don't know what our Facebook page is, if you go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, you'll see that we have a very vibrant Facebook page of students and qualified practitioners. And one of the comments and conversations that comes up again and again and again is training routes. And we've had so many people who've posted that they've taken a training route that hasn't led to either progression, so they can't go to the next level, or they've done a training route where they think they've qualified as a counsellor only to discover that their qualification, quite frankly, isn't worth the paper it's written on. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Derek Cunningham from CPCAB, who's going to tell us about an initiative CPCAB has brought forward, and it's a information taster. Derek, first of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rory. It's a pleasure. It's been a little while since we last met to do a podcast. I've been looking forward to this. It's a great opportunity to sort of help people make an informed decision, really, and I'm sure we'll find out more about that as we explore it. But it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, well, it's good to speak to you again. And I think the last time we met, we spoke about just the same thing, didn't we? About there's a plethora of courses that are offered. Some are legitimate routes to progression in counselling training, where you could do, maybe you do an introduction, then you do a certificate, then you do a diploma, and you might want to go up and top up with a degree or a master's degree. And there are some that are very tempting. They're usually totally online, so that you could go online and do them online. They're usually at quite a high level, maybe a level 4, maybe a level 5. But what happens when people get the qualifications, they discover they can't join a professional body such as NCPS or the BACP, and the employers really don't recognise those qualifications. It's a bit of a worry, isn't it, Derek?
I think it is. And as you say, Rory, last time we met, we discussed the learner journey and the idea that you can start something and then get to the destination you had in mind, which is to be considered and acknowledged as a qualified and trained counsellor. But no matter how much you try to provide this information, the internet is a very, very big place. And if people go in and start looking around, the choices they have, there's just so many, as you said, a plethora of choices. How do they perhaps know the best choice to make for them? And this is really what it's about, because if we're looking at why we're all in this industry, I think I can safely speak for myself and I hope for yourself too. It's about providing the best service to the clients at the end of the day, at the destination. And to do that, we need to provide the best opportunities to learners to train as a counsellor. And hopefully, and we'll talk about the taster, hopefully this will give them the information to make an informed decision and say, okay, these are the choices. These are all the things that come flying up when I go in and say, how do I become a counsellor? Let me contrast and compare, and then let me make a decision going forward with the knowledge that I'll get to the destination I want to get to.
Yes, because I think it's fair to say, and certainly we both taught, Derek, it's fair to say that most students who do counselling courses, we may see them, and the reason I'm using introduction, certificate and diploma level is because our friends in Scotland have a different qualification
Yes.
level. But I think broadly, introduction, certificate, and diploma, it would cover our friends in Scotland. Their qualifications,
Yes.
the level that is slightly different. So, most people, certainly in my case, I did an introduction course, and then I was hooked and I wanted to become a qualified therapist, and I carried on. I did a certificate, and then I did a diploma, at which point I kind of reached my goal. And it was very simple when I did it 20 odd years ago, because the internet hardly existed, and you just toddled on down to the local college and they provided the qualifications. But the world, as you say, has changed, and you just go online. And I saw the other day, very tempting, I have to say, with his tongue in his cheek, I could become a qualified counsellor in a weekend for 20 quid.
Yes, I can see why it's tempting as well.
Yeah.
My experience it mirrors yours, really, Rory. I didn't need to, be subjected to a bombardment of information. I went to my local college and discussed it with them there. And then I was immediately on the correct route to get to where I want to get to. So I can see why people make the choices they make, because the information that they have is perhaps, that's the best way to put it, well, it's so varied. There's so many things. And how do they actually find out? And I think if we look at the taster, it's an opportunity to just see, what does counselling training involve? And if I want to be a trained and qualified professional counsellor, what are the steps I need to take? And that's kind of an oversimplification of it, but that is the essence of what this is designed for, to in a way, to protect the learners and equip them to work in the best possible way as a practitioner with the clients, which is what we're all focused on.
Absolutely, and I'll pick that up, the ability to be able to work with clients, because it's not just a case of getting a qualification. That qualification is a, if you do up to level 4, the qualification is a passport, and that passport allows you into certain organisations, such as professional bodies, such as employment. And one of the things that people do, it's not compulsory. We don't have regulation, government regulation in this country, but the preferred path to employment would be to get your qualification or be part of an ethical body as you train, and then once you qualify, you join as a full member, and that's then seen as a basic entry into employment, I think, Derek, isn't it? But employers would look for the relevant qualification and membership of a ethical or professional body.
It's an indicator that training has taken place, and I think that's very fair, because when you refer to it as a sort of a passport or a license in an unregulated industry, not just into employment, but also to sit in a room with a vulnerable human being, just the two of you in there, unmonitored, if you wish, unsupervised. And of course, supervision is a critical part of what we do as therapists, and it's something that we learn as we train. So I think that places a great deal of responsibility on all of us, yourself and myself included, to really just try and be a part of the most positive aspect of the landscape of training counsellors that we can. We can't control everything, Rory, but as individuals and as organisations, we can certainly keep a focus on them.
Yes, and it's a reassurance for the general public as well, isn't it? Because the general public may not, may not be as aware as people in the profession about levelness of qualifications. They may need help. They're desperate for help. They go onto a website, they see someone's got a qualification, and if it is one of the qualifications that isn't community based, or it's purely online, and maybe I'll take the worst case scenario. You start on Friday night and you're qualified on Monday morning. There's a good chance that client isn't going to get the best possible service, and also the person who's delivering it might find themselves in some difficulty as well.
I think so, because I think you hit the nail on the head there when you mentioned community based. For me, there's a difference between learning and training. There's loads of ways we can learn. We can learn online. We can learn from YouTube. There's loads of ways we can learn a lot of useful information but training in a community with feedback, with the camaraderie and the relationships you develop in a community with your peers, with your tutor, and to some extent having a rudder, if you like, to steer you along that pathway. I know certainly, I don't know if it's your experience, but of all the years I taught counselling training, the students learned as much from each other as they could possibly from me as a tutor or anywhere else. So that community is absolutely essential, where you can perhaps feel safe to display your skills, to practice something which is very, very new to you, and know that someone's going to give you some feedback that is going to be constructive, open and fair, to allow you to improve without really jeopardizing your opportunity and moving forward. And I think that's the thing with counselling training. It's not about doing everything right all the time, first time straight away. It's about doing things individually and differently and getting the feedback so that you can find what works for me and improves. So the community is so important. And that community, I mean, we're in a community now online. We see each other, we're talking, we're relating, and it's fantastic. So there's a place for remote learning. But then face-to-face in the classroom, you're trying to replicate those skills that are going to be needed when you sit with somebody you've never ever met before. And it's very difficult to replicate those as it is. So to replicate them without any human physical contact, for me, I don't think that's really the best way forward.
Yes, and certainly, in what we call first trainings, which is where people are learning to be or kind of learning to be a counsellor. I think that's really important that at some point you're sat in a community, face to face. And I'll pick up on the point, Derek, that feedback is so important. If you're training to be a counsellor, there's all the theory, which is great, and you can learn the theory, which is fantastic. But learning about yourself, how that theory impacts on yourself and your own journey through life, I think is just as an important piece in counselling training, because what happens is one becomes introspective, one does self-examination, and that means that you get feedback from your peers. Sometimes, it's quite, stark. Sometimes I've had feedback that's like, a bit hard to hear, but on reflection, it's like, yeah, probably right. Probably right.
That's a really key point, isn't it? Because with feedback, I don't know when learners are first embarking, they hear the word feedback. I don't know what they imagine. I wouldn't have had a clue what it meant. But I certainly didn't have any idea that I would need to learn to give feedback and even more critically learn to receive feedback.
Yes.
So that it becomes a very positive experience. And I think that's a good example of what the aims of the taster, one of them is, what is counselling training going to involve? What will I do? What will I experience? And within that, one of the things you'll see, which talks about feedback and learning to give, learning to receive, and the purpose of it as well, because we need to understand why we're doing something, and we need to understand what the benefits are. And I think that's a good example of the route the taster takes. What am I going to do if I do this course? What will I be doing? Yeah. And feedback is one of the things that you'll be involved in from the very, very outset.
Yes, and you mentioned the taster information. So CPCAB have produced, and I'm sure you'll tell us all about it, a information taster on what the routes are and what might be expected of someone who's embarking on counselling training, which will be recognised when you get to the end of that route. You won't have that disappointment of, well, we don't recognise this qualification, or I'm afraid you can't join our professional body because we don't recommend this qualification. So CPCAB, for those who don't know, is an awarding body. When you get your certificate, there are a number of awarding bodies, but when you get your certificate, it will have CPCAB on it, and they are quality producers of qualifications, and CPCAB have made this information taster. So tell us a little bit about that, Derek.
I think what you've just mentioned, it's a step beyond, because when we talked about earlier about how do I become a counsellor, this is a step beyond. This is a taste of what that will involve. This is an idea of what's going to happen in the classroom, what you're going to participate in. So it's for prospective learners. So, for example, those who are exploring counselling training or interested in a career as a counsellor, it gives them some insight into the counselling landscape. So what will I actually be doing and what should I be looking for? Because if you know, then you can make an informed decision.
Yeah. Yeah, and what format does this take? So we will give a link to this information taster, but what format does it take, and what would people expect to experience or see when they click the link?
When you go to the link, it will take you to a website where you can enroll and you can go through the taster, and it follows a sort of a set pattern. But it talks about things like what are the skills that I will need to learn as a counsellor, and how will I potentially learn them, and what is the theory that they're based in. So it's not a complex amount of information, but it is key sort of information to let you really know that when I go into a classroom, whether it's remotely with my colleagues or it's physically into a classroom, these are the sort of things we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at difference and diversity. We're going to be looking at key skills and communication skills, and things like we're going to be looking at the difference between talking to a counsellor, talking to a friend, those sorts of things. So to some extent, we're understanding what people might imagine counselling training to be, and we're trying to establish what counselling training might actually involve for them, because you don't get a taste of that just by following some instructions on a computer screen. So, yeah, what will counselling training involve? And that's the question we're trying to sort of answer, because someone's now making the effort and they're going online and they're thinking, right, how do I try to become a counsellor? What will I have to do? And we're aiming to make sure they have the correct information. And it's I say so myself, it is interesting, and in places it's very, very enjoyable, and that's key. And that's probably one of the keys to really high quality counselling training, is that it is interesting and enjoyable.
Absolutely. So people click this link, and what format is this delivered in? Is it going to be a live session, or is it going to be, what will people experience? You click the link, and then what happens from there?
There's a series of videos. There's some gentleman leading it and talking. That's myself. So it's gentleman, I might be a bit of a fast stretch. And then it shows some role plays. There's an excerpt from an actual counselling session. And then there's some commentary and discussion on what's happened and what's occurred. There's information about, Carl Rogers and his thoughts and feelings around what are now known as the core conditions. But of course, he didn't call them the core conditions, but how critical they are in human communication. And it's interesting because when you do level 2 and you go into a classroom, the first thing you're starting to learn is these key communication skills, and you're learning them because you're communicating with other human beings.
Yes.
So that is really, really quite crucial. So if I'm going to sort of be a bit repetitive here and say, right, we need to understand, what is empathic understanding? How do we show that? How do we be congruent? And how do we offer unconditional positive regard to someone? It's no good if I just read that. I need to practice that. I need to try and work out what I'm doing, and not just what I'm doing, but how it feels when someone is also offering that to me. So hopefully people will get an idea of the sort of things that they will be able to learn that will set them on that platform to progress to the next route to get to their final point, which is to be a qualified counsellor.
I think it's an excellent initiative, and I'll pick up on that point. It's not a way of doing, it's a way of being. I think that one of the things that I noticed in level 2, or sometimes we'll call that introduction level for our friends in Scotland, because they have slightly different qualifications, introduction level, is that I have had students who've come in and thought it was all about learning the theory. It's all about the theory and applying the theory. And actually, in reality, it's more about how you apply the theory to yourself in the way the relationship is carried out, certainly in person-centered therapy. And it could save, this taster could save people a lot of time, because I don't know if it's been your experience, Derek, but I've had people who've got like halfway through the class and they said, I didn't think this is what counselling was. I thought it was advice giving or coaching or 100 other kind of things. And they didn't realise, I guess, the personal investment that goes into becoming a therapist. It's not just being able to learn the theories from a textbook. It's about being able to live the values and build the relationships that provide, you know, at practice level as a counsellor, that healing facilitative function that counselling has.
Well, I can really relate to that, Rory, because I know when I first started training, I imagined that what I was going to be doing was asking people questions and then giving them advice.
Yes.
And nothing could be further from the truth as it transpired.
Yes.
Now, fortunately, when I started training, I really enjoyed it. And it was a kind of a shock to the system and to my ideology that I was going to have to do all these different things. But it was something that I really enjoyed, and I continued with it. But it wasn't anywhere near what I thought it was going to be, anywhere near what I expected. So for some people, as you say, partway through, they might think, well, this isn't what I wanted to do. But the other option is, of course, that they do a lot of learning online. And then when it comes to the relational aspect, when it comes to those communication skills, they haven't been able to practice them and consider them. So the fact that it's a relational training in a community, and I know that, you know, to some extent I'm repeating myself. I've been saying this for years and years. But post-COVID, it's become an even more important message to get out there, because the educational landscape has changed. You know, for me, I was locked away in my house for nearly 2 years. Everything happened from sitting at this desk I'm sitting at now. Now, post-COVID, my life's not changed back completely to how it was before, but I'm fortunate enough that, you know, it has changed and returned a lot. Whereas some people will think that, okay, well, that's how we learned then, so that's okay now. But that was a contingency measure. It
was an emergency situation.
Yeah.
You know, it was a, you know, looking back at that, it was incredible times. You know, I said to my wife at the time, it's a bit like being on a war footing. The whole of our lives changed to a different way of living, and as you say, it was living mainly in your own home.
Yeah.
for almost 2 years, and education went online. But now, and it's quite kind of interesting. People have different experiences of online learning, and so we've gone back to how training should be. We've spoken a lot about this taster. Let's speak a little bit about how people access it. So if you want to access it, I'm sure you'll have a link on the CPCAB website.
We have a link, but also it's an easy link to remember, because it's taster.cpcab.co.uk, and that will take you straight to the taster, and you can experience it and really see what it does for you, how you, whether it's what you want to do, whether it's what you'd like to do, and how you sort of move on from there. Because there has been, in the last few years post-pandemic, there's been a decline in the quality of training at the early stages. And the early stages are so critical because they're the foundation, the platform to go on and really enjoy and progress as best you can. So hopefully, if they go to taster.cpcab.co.uk, they can participate, they can enroll in it, they can do the taster, and then they can make a decision. Is this what I thought? Is it what I want to do? Our focus and our vision, CPCAB, is to prepare the best practitioners with the best possible qualifications so that the client gets the best possible service. And that's what everything we do is focused on that. And this taster, again, is probably, it's almost like taking a step backwards. When we did the learner journey, which you and I spoke about, it was great because it said, right, this is how you train to become a counsellor. One way, two ways. But there was never actually any information on what you do to train to become a counsellor. So in a sort of ironic way, I could say to you, Roy, right, this is what you do to train to become a counsellor. You go down that route. You're not actually trained to become a counsellor, but you don't know that because I didn't tell you at the time what you will be doing when you get on that route. So that's I think the crucial factor here is a taste of what you will be doing, so that when you get into a course, a qualification that you want to lead you to become a professional counsellor, you'll have a safe, warm feeling that this is correct, this is right, this is what counselling training involves.
Yeah, it effectively could save you a lot of your time, a lot of your money, and ultimately disappointment should you've gone on the wrong training pathway. The course is free. It's free to access, and we will put the link on our website. So if you're a counselling tutor fan and you want to know the show notes for this podcast, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, it's a CPCAB special edition, and it goes out on December of 2023, and you'll find us in between episodes. Special editions don't have numbers, but you'll find us between episode 285 and 286. It's the one after 285 special edition. I think it's a brilliant initiative to be able to effectively give a resource for free that potential students can look at, get informed, make sure they take the right training pathways, the right decision, work out if counselling training is for them. You know, it may be that people look at it and go, not what I thought, I want to do something else, which is fine. So you're not having to pay your money out to do a course to find that out. But also, I think very crucially, that it's a training path that leads to a satisfactory result at the end, so that what we don't have is that disappointment of, printing your certificates out on a computer, which is some of these, shall we say, weekend courses ask you to do, and then find out that really it's not worth the paper and the ink that you printed it on. It's an achievement to have learned something, but actually applying for jobs, actually setting up in private practice, it's just not going to take you where you want to do. So we thank CPCAB for that, and Derek Cunningham, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Rory, always a pleasure. And I have to totally agree with you on that last point. We're not telling people what pathway to take, but we will show them what to look out for to be able to understand they're on the correct pathway. Not for anything that we want per se, but for what they want, which is to become a well-equipped, competent, creative counsellor. And that I think is a wonderful opportunity. Certainly something I've been very, very grateful for the opportunities that I've had.
Well, thank you for coming on today, and also thank you for sharing the link to that free information taster.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.